traffic, but I only live in Mountain View. It shouldn't take that long.
Thank you again for being here as we transition today to start to talk about the disc process. If this works, there we go. So, thank you again for joining us here tonight. I wanted to start by getting a motion to approve the minutes from the last meeting. If I can get a motion from anyone, someone.
So moved.
Thank you, Edward. Do we need a second? Thank you, Norma. Okay, so on we go. So the agenda for tonight, as usual, we'll go over the group agreements real quick, as we always do. We're not going to spend too much time on the notes from last time. We mailed those out. We really want to focus tonight's discussion on the Diridon Integrated Station Concept Plan. We have a presentation. We want to have a great discussion about that. So that'll be the primary focus of tonight's meeting. With that, group agreements, I don't think I need to remind you, but you all have been great at doing this. Just again, keeping an open mind, understanding diverse perspectives, not speaking over each other, and really just getting yourselves into this moment and understanding that we're kind of transitioning to a new topic. We really want you to give us your thoughts and work together and think big and have fun, all those great concepts. So with that, we're going to actually dive right in, unless there's any questions from the previous meetings or why we're here tonight or what we're doing. No? Okay. We're ready. Yeah? If you four want to come on up, or three, with... I'll move all this.
All right, thanks. Good evening, everyone. Thanks for having us. I'm really excited to introduce our team here. I'm Eric Idland from the City of San Jose Department of Transportation. I work primarily on Diridon Station on this project that we're going to tell you about today. So I think what's really exciting about what we're kicking off here is that I think many of you were part of the Diridon Stationary Plan process, and for a long time, people have understood the real opportunity here. We have more modes converging at the station than anywhere else in the Bay Area. But I think a big stumbling block has been the large number of agencies that are involved, nobody really knowing who takes the lead. Well, what's really exciting here is we are jointly, all the four primary public agencies with a stake in the station are jointly sponsoring this project. And we've hired some of the best station designers in the world who you'll hear from to help us with this project. So as I said, I'm Eric Idland. I'm going to talk about start off just setting the planning framework to talk about some of the foundations that are assumptions that we're building on, some of the efforts you've already been part of. Just touch on why Diridon Station is so important to San Jose and the Bay Area. And then just give you a few tidbits on the concept plan. Then I'll turn it over to Daniel and Martin, who will talk more in detail about the plan and the process. And then Lori, who you know well, will talk to you about how we're going to interface with the community more generally. Okay, so as many of you know, those of you who are part of the general plan process and the Diridon Stationary Plan, some key goals here are to attract more activity and especially employment to the downtown core. And also we recognize that we can't accommodate a lot more density, a lot more people with our current transportation system. We need modes that can do that more efficiently. The Diridon Stationary Plan was really focusing on establishing the Diridon area as part of a larger downtown to become a really major job center in the region. And also to foster a really lively public realm that supports walking and bicycling. So as I've already mentioned, this is the place in the Bay Area where the most modes converge. I think many of you know this already. So we know to the north in San Francisco, they have the Transbay Transit Center, and that's a very important station for serving a very important job center, but we have more modes converging down here in San Jose, in downtown. Just to give you a sense of volumes here today, we have currently about 17,000 people passing through Diridon on a daily basis. So this is very preliminary, but based on some of the analysis that VTA has done, we're estimating that by 2040 we could have something like 140,000 people passing through the station. That might sound a lot, but just to give you a sense, today at LA Union Station you have about 110,000 people. The Transbay Joint Powers Authority estimates about 125,000 for Transbay. And perhaps something you're more familiar with is San Francisco International Airport. That has about 145,000 people a day. So that's right, we're anticipating something along the lines of San Francisco International Airport at the station on a daily basis. And that might sound like a lot, but I'll tell you it's actually not that much for a train station. To give you a sense, Berlin main station has about 300,000 people per day. Amsterdam main station about 250,000 per day. I'll also mention Berlin has several stations that accommodate this number of passengers on a daily basis. So why is a train station? Why are we going to all of this effort to do a train station project? Well, to answer that first, I want to ask all of you a question. And I'll let maybe one or two of you answer. So does anybody want to tell me why cities exist? I know it's a very broad question, but does anybody want to tell me what's the purpose of a city? One of the SAAG members? Maybe one of the SAAG members? Nobody? You're not that shy. Come on. I'm going to pick on Teresa. No?
You mean city government or
No, why does a city exist? What's the function of a city?
to serve its residents?
More fundamentally, what's the purpose of it? Harvey, maybe you have an idea. I know you've got your mouth full, but...
To give people a place to live, work, and breathe.
There you go. So, cities, sorry to become wonky on you, but cities facilitate exchange by bringing people, goods, and services closer together. Teresa's colleague at Spur, Ben Grant, says cities are a labor-saving technology, which is a fancy way of saying they bring people, services, and goods closer together. So if you think of the great cities of the world, probably the first place you think of when you think of a city is maybe New York, right? So here's Times Square. So you see these people, enjoying their time, spending a lot of time close together. You go to Berlin, Hackescher Markt in Berlin, same thing. City brings people together. Toronto, Santiago, Chile, Bali, Marrakesh, the great markets of Marrakesh, they facilitate exchange. And here in San Jose too, this is the SoFa neighborhood. So, how does a train station fit into this? Well, a train station, like a city, is space efficient. Okay, a train station allows you to bring many people through a downtown while using up not a lot of real estate. And that's the scarce resource in a city. So Utrecht, which Martin lived right by the station, or worked right by the station here, on a daily basis, 300,000 people come through the station on a daily basis. And this is a stone's throw from a very quaint medieval downtown. So can you imagine doing this kind of thing if it were SFO? If there were planes flying in and out here? No, you can't do that. A train station is uniquely compatible with a dense city center. And that's really why we're so focused on introducing a modern, efficient train station into downtown San Jose. It's also the reason why many other cities, in France, for example, the biggest employment districts outside of Paris are around high-speed rail stations. So these are numbers from the city of Lyon, which is the second biggest city in France, but similar numbers in the northern French city of Lille. The other important thing to talk about, and I know Daniel will talk about this more, is that a train station is really uniquely compatible with, you could integrate it into the urban fabric. And one thing we liked, some of us went on a European study tour last summer, and we heard from the lead architect of Rotterdam main station showed here, and he said a station is a public space with a roof on top. Okay, so I presented to this body in April, and I talked about our study trip, but just to remind you, we talked about some of the main lessons we learned. Those included start first with your vision. Don't start with your constraints, so aim big and bold. Transportation projects are urban projects, so when you build those rail lines, you need to think about how those are going to impact the quality of life and the quality of the urban environment. Train tracks, there are only so many ways you can bring tracks into a city, so you need to start with that. But you also need to think about how they're going to impact the quality of life in the city. So you need to think about the person, the user, the station user. And of course, if we want people to use these systems that we're investing in so dearly, we're spending a lot of money on these modes of transportation, we need to make sure that in some, these are the best, most convenient ways to get around. So we want to have the most seamless intermodal connections possible. So that's the purpose of the concept plan. And I'll turn it over to Martin and Daniel here. But the main purposes of the concept plan are to establish those seamless, very convenient connections between transportation modes. We also want to make sure that the relationship between the station and the surrounding city is the best possible one from an urban development standpoint. And as I started my presentation, we have a large number of stakeholders that are involved in this station effort. So we need a more effective, rational, organizational structure to deliver the vision. So that's the other part of our scope of work. And you've seen this complicated diagram before, but basically, in our last presentation, we talked about how this plan relates to the BART project, to Caltrain electrification, high-speed rail. So basically, this diagram just shows you how outputs from those planning efforts will feed into the concept plan. So I won't dwell on this. I'll turn it over now to what we call, it's Arcadis Bentham Crowell, we call them in short ABC.
Thank you, Eric. I'm very happy to have the opportunity here to introduce Arcadis and Bentham Crowell. And we are extremely proud to have been selected as both designers and consultants engineers for the Diridon Station concept plan. Now, we are two separate firms. Arcadis is an engineering and consultancy firm. Bentham Crowell is an architecture firm. But we work truly together as an integrated team. And these are some of the main people in our team that work here locally, that stay here. Some of them fly up and down, and that you'll be seeing again. This isn't the whole team, of course. We work with a front office right here in San Jose, but some of the work happens in the Netherlands also. So in totality, there's a far larger number of people involved in this effort. Let's see. The reason why we have this collaboration between these two firms is that both Arcadis, with their broad experience, as well as Bentham Crowell, have a very long tradition in designing transit and infrastructure projects. And in the past couple of decades, both individually and collectively, we've been designing a very large number of transit projects, subway projects, airport projects, in the Netherlands in this case, where we designed pretty much all of the train stations, high-speed stations also in the Dutch metropolitan region. We've been doing the same work in Europe, and we've been exporting our experience to France, Paris in particular, and also to the United Kingdom. And as we got more and more experience, we went further out in the world and worked also in Asia, both of our firms in Australia, Arcadis in particular, in the Middle East, and also in the United States. And this experience, which is to some extent separate but also very much shared, we've been able to accomplish because Arcadis has a global presence with firms on the ground, offices on the ground in different countries. So that means that we're internationals, but we're also locals at the same time. The experience that we have, and that I think is most relevant for the Diridon Station project, are these 4 stations that we've delivered in the Netherlands in the past couple of years. And what you see in the top left is the Rotterdam Central Station. The top right is the The Hague Central Station. Lower left is Utrecht, and to the right is the Amsterdam Station. And these 4 stations we've been showing last year to this group of representatives from San Jose. And this is how we first learned about the Diridon Station effort. And this was a very interesting trip that Eric has been telling you about before. And for us, this was an opportunity to share our experience and to a group which was incredibly dedicated to do anything in their power to acquire an enormous amount of knowledge and see how the best could be done for Diridon. So this is when we got interested in the Diridon Station, and that's about a year ago, and that's why we're so thrilled to be selected right now. The stations that we visited together and that we talked about were these. It was the Amsterdam Station, which is a truly city transformational project which far extends beyond the transit and it gives a spark to the development of the city around it. And that station is a true multimodal facility that integrates a subterranean subway station with direct connection to all modes of transit. It has a ground plane which is totally free for space-efficient modes of transportation, bicycles and pedestrians, and also provides facilities such as retail, shops and restaurants to people. On an elevated deck above that, there's a bus station. You see the bus right there in the middle. And we did that to make sure that there's no intersections at all between the buses and pedestrians, so that all transit is right there, but you can, it is safe and easy to use. The Utrecht Central Station is another example of a station which is at the same time an urban connection, and it's the biggest train station in the Netherlands with about 300,000 passengers per day, so larger than even some airports. This project also integrates all modes of transportation, a lot of buses we have in Utrecht, and it also has a lot of commercial development right on top of it and right next to it. And this finally is the Rotterdam Central Station, which I think has a lot of similarities to the situation we find in Diridon. For example, what we have in Rotterdam is to the right in the screen, there's a residential area with small-scale housing, whereas to the left of the tracks, there's a business district with mid-rise and high-rise buildings. And this station is trying to, and has succeeded in connecting those areas and providing very easy access to transit. So this is a high-speed station, and what we did is design a building which is primarily for people and which provides a comfortable and easy access to trains, a protection against the rain, a problem we don't have here in San Jose, fortunately, and revolves around people and puts people first and makes infrastructure serve people and not the other way around. So this station has connects to the urban fabric, as Eric was saying, and what that means is that as you enter the station or leave the station, there's this big plaza, which is basically a large covered square. And that's a central place where you make a natural transition from the urban fabric into the transit system. And it's a place to start your journey, to end your journey, to meet people, to do some shopping, and to comfortably wait or hang out on your journey. So these are some of the themes that we've been working with in the Netherlands in the past few years. And some of those we think are also applicable to the Diridon context. And we are greatly looking forward to doing that. We just started. And how we're going to do that, Martin will present to you.
So my name is Martin Brinkhuis. Like Eric just introduced myself, I used to use the train station of Utrecht Centraal every day. But for this project, which I got in contact to some time ago, I have relocated here together with my wife, and I live in Willow Glen. And I appreciate much the cultural diversity of San Jose, and want to use my experience in building train stations in the Netherlands, and second of all, also enjoy and work with you on this exploration of cultural diversity during our trip of redeveloping Diridon train station. For me, as project manager, it's my job to work with a schedule and a scope, and I'll take you through that. Let me see. Here we go. The intent of this slide is not to be fully exact, to be fully legible, but it gives you the outline of our work. What you see on the top is a timeline from September until June. And what we have started with is finding out from the 4 partner agencies all their ambitions and requirements, because it all sets the stage for our work. We want to know what the key objectives are and how we can fit them into the design and in our work. From that point forward, we're going to start working on scenario development and selections, is what we've called. So for now, we are going to work until the end of March on developing 3 scenarios. And from those 3 scenarios, we're going to choose a so-called single preferred option, which we want to move forward into April, May, and June for further development. So we expect somewhere in early spring, around summer next year, to deliver a single preferred option, work together with the partner agencies and recommendations from us and our experiences. Which we come to learn over the past week, which our experiences sometimes are absolutely normal to us by using it every day, which we get to share more on a day-to-day basis that we really have to be explicit about. So that's the schedule, just to give you an outline. Laurie will interact with you a little bit more later on how that schedule goes with public outreach. That schedule I just showed you is not work done, which we're going to sit behind our desks and sit behind the stage and present this to you together with the partner agencies, which this picture is trying to show. We're going to work in an interactive process in funneling our work down to find 3 scenarios which would work for San Jose. And all the topics we are we're looking at, this is scope, why I said the schedule and scope. We're going to touch a lot of topics, and we're going to look into a lot of topics. I'm not going to go address every single one of them right now, but as you can see, we are going to look at a lot of topics to make this train station work. What Eric just talked to you about is how we can integrate this into a space-efficient manner for San Jose. A picture we also like to use is this one, because in our opinion, it's not a hard scope we have defined. We will learn that along the way. It's more of a fuzzy border. Obviously, the track configuration itself has a very clear defined border, but the integration itself at the Diridon train station is still to be defined, and that will take some time. But it should set the stage for the redevelopment of the San Jose train station area. This is how it currently looks. And probably in 10, 20 years' time, it will look a lot different and hopefully will fulfill the need to bring San Jose and its transit needs to the next level. And that's it for me. I think I'm going to hand it over to Laurie.
All right, so in the packet that we handed out to you at the beginning of the meeting is the draft outreach strategy for the concept plan. We also included a link to it in the agenda that we sent out last week. So you may have already read through this, but I will be providing you an overview now. So these are the topics covered in the draft outreach strategy. I was the lead in drafting the strategy, and I'll be the lead in implementing it, but it is very much a coordinated effort among all 4 partner agencies in preparing the strategy and implementing it. So the strategy begins with background on the concept plan. This is essentially an overview of the information you just heard from these gentlemen here. So it gives you a good sense of what the concept plan process is about. In terms of roles in the decision-making process over the concept plan, the policy bodies of the partner agencies will have decision-making authority. So this includes the City Council of San Jose, the VTA Board of Directors, the Board of Directors of the Caltrain High-Speed Rail Authority, and the Peninsula Corridor Joint Powers Board, which is Caltrain. So the partner agencies will consult the community and will consider that input that we receive during the development of the concept plan. So some of the key objectives of the outreach strategy here is to keep the public informed. So there's several bullets in the strategy, and so I'll just call out a couple. It's very important for the agency to inform the public about the purpose of this concept plan, given that there's been so much work to date on Diridon Station and planning for BART and high-speed rail to come in. So why are we doing this now? Why are we taking this approach? Later on, we'll get into more information on the range of potential benefits and impacts to consider at this conceptual stage. We're also looking to encourage an active, broad range of the community to participate in the process, and with the goal of hearing from a wide range of community perspectives. And ultimately, we want to foster a sense of pride in the concept plan. So this graphic shows you how the objectives of the engagement process shift throughout. So early on in the process, and then again later in the process, there's going to be a lot of focus on that information and education, whereas there'll be more emphasis on gathering feedback in the middle. And that's where there'll be more diagrams and information to share with you as to the 3 or so scenarios that it will be considered for before narrowing it into one single preferred option. So this fall, we'll be going out to the public, including you all as stakeholders, to get reactions to the high-level project vision statement that the partner agencies have developed. And we'll be seeking to identify the major aspirations and concerns around the station, building upon outreach completed to date, of course. Later on, we'll be educating on the scenarios and obtaining feedback on the trade-offs between them. And then in the last stage, once there's a single preferred option, we will describe how that option meets the project vision and objectives and get additional feedback that could be considered for refining the concept plan. So the outreach strategy lists a few target populations of the general public, one of those being transit riders themselves, residents and businesses in the surrounding area, populations with a higher rate of transit dependence. And this is a project of citywide and regional and really statewide importance. So when we say general public, we are definitely focused on the city of San Jose, but want to also acknowledge that there's a regional interest in this as well. So for proposed engagement activities, we will be doing a variety of methods. So the first one is community meetings, much like we've held this year for the civic engagement process. So we're thinking tentatively about one per these 3 outreach phases. Stakeholder presentations to community groups that invite us to learn more about the project, interviews with community leaders, focus groups with transit users, we're looking at a variety of ways to use online and mobile tools as well, especially to catch input from transit riders. And pop-up booths at the station and other locations is another good way to catch transit riders. So advisory groups, including yourselves, we plan to check in with several times. So this is the first kickoff event with the stationary advisory group. The other partner agencies have their own groups, of course, and some of you are on those. They're called community working groups for BART, VTA and high-speed rail. So we'll be going to those groups as well. And then the partner agencies will be organizing, or have been organizing and will continue to have outreach events for their specific transit projects. So we will be coordinating outreach on the concept plan with those transit projects so that you will be receiving consistent and clear information about all of the projects. And lastly are the policy body meetings, where once this item, or once the concept plan goes to the policy bodies for any type of consideration or decision, that is another forum in which there can be public outreach. So here is the input that we are seeking this fall, just some broad, high-level questions. And so you probably are feeling fatigue after many months, and this may look familiar to you. So keep in mind that these are questions that we're going to be asking the public as well. So our intention is to build upon the feedback that we've been gathering and that is being documented in the report. Especially with respect to the transportation, the public space, the design desired outcomes. Those provide a very good foundation for the concept plan work. And so we'll be building upon those and looking for more detail. And of course, the outreach over the next few months and into the summer of 2019 will be focused a lot on the station itself. And so that includes the relationship to its surroundings, but it's a lot about the connections, access, mobility, with a strong focus on the user experience, as well as on the future. So that is the general questions that Dave is going to be leading a discussion on. And so in your packet, I also gave you just a one-pager that has these questions. It has the aerial with the topics that you saw earlier, as well as the high-level vision statement. So that is, I'm just going to read it to you because it's just, this forms the base foundation for the concept plan work and where we're trying to take Diridon. So the vision is to deliver a world-class transportation hub that provides seamless customer experience for movement between transit modes within the station and into the surrounding neighborhoods and downtown. So on the right side are some objectives for the station with some words like multimodal, integrated, human-centered, catalyst, connector, future-proof. These can all be interpreted a lot of different ways, and so we want to know from the public and you all, what do these mean to you? And how can we develop performance measures and things like that to develop our concept plan? So with that, I'll turn it over to Dave to lead a discussion with you all. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much. Lori, I already see Harvey already has his card up. He knows the process. I was going to ask you initially if you have any questions about the concept plan or anything that was presented, and I'm going to let Harvey lead us off. And remember, just flip your cards over and I'll let you know when it's your turn.
Okay.
Name and organization, Harvey just said.
Yeah, Harvey Darnell, North Willow Glen. I was looking at the slide that the gentleman who just moved into Willow Glen, I didn't catch your name, I'm sorry.
Martin.
My name is Martin Brinkhuis.
Martin. Well, Martin, I was looking at the two slides that you have showing the concepts, and it was yellow. It showed the rail corridor. And unfortunately, what I see there is that the southern approaches are, yeah, exactly. are going right through on the Caltrain right-of-way, the Joint Powers Board right-of-way, without any consideration of the alternative, which is to go around the neighborhood, which the 4 neighborhoods that touch that have all requested. So I want to make sure that that is in the consideration and that you haven't already made a decision.
Harvey, we are absolutely considering the alternative that you are discussing over the 87-280 interchange.
Okay. Well, it would be helpful. It will, you know, if you're trotting this out to the community,
Yeah, we'll update the graphic.
you
absolutely.
may need to update it because it will freak everyone out.
Thank you, Harvey. We'll go to Bill and then to John.
Thank you for the presentations.
Bill, if you could remind everyone name and
Sorry.
organization.
Yeah,
Thank
Bill
you.
Souders, San Jose Downtown Residents Association. And just kind of a clarifying question, I got a little bit confused with one of Laurie's last statements. When you were talking about growing from 17,000 transit activities to 150,000 transit activities daily, those are not connections, right? Those are people that would just be passing through, or are they connections? And the reason I ask that is that I can't judge by looking at the photographs how much area is required in a place like Utrecht or Amsterdam. And would we consume all of the space we've got in the Diridon area just with the transit center?
So I think I should probably take that one. So again, I mentioned that the ridership modeling was very preliminary, and we're doing a much more thorough study of that as part of this project. The numbers, though, that you saw, it was 70,000 users per direction per day. There would also be some station users who are not actually train passengers, people who are passing from west to east or vice versa, using the station as a connection point. But I mean, the key point I tried to emphasize in my presentation is that, you know, you really can accommodate a very large number of people on not a lot of real estate, with relatively little impact on the city. So whether we're talking 120,000 or 180,000, the amount of space, the total footprint of the station might not be all that different. I mean, maybe, do you guys want to comment on that, or from your experience in the Netherlands? Yeah.
Well, I think that with regard to the urban station, what we're also looking at is more efficient and better ways of using the infrastructure. So in the figures that you just heard, you could get the impression that we need 10 times more of everything, but that doesn't mean we're going to make 10 times more platforms, obviously. We're looking at different ways to use those so that we be as space efficient as possible.
Thank you very much. John?
John Pettigo, PACT. Part of the thing I was looking at the European models of downtowns is that they tend to be more downtown models in Europe tend to not have as many low-income people in them as American downtowns. And you know, have gone to different European cities and taken public transportation there. I'm always struck by how clean and how easy and how efficient public transportation is, because there's a kind of the seamless connection whether you're going to a small village from a large urban area. But I've also noticed, unlike our towns, that there's not a lot of poor people there. And that raises for me the question of displacement and the character of diversity and economic diversity, cultural diversity, and that if we have, you know, with Google and with the Diridon station, we do talk about displacement, and that's inevitable. And then the neighborhoods that we want to preserve, I just don't see how physically that would be possible. So I just raise that question of there is a lot of displacement, and I am still concerned about we can plan for these big projects, but if we don't have a parallel layer plan to deal with displacement and gentrification, I'm deeply concerned that we started off the discussion, what is a city? And I'm afraid that we aren't really going to be able to hold that definition of city anymore when we begin to exclude certain groups of people and certain classes of people from participating in the marketplace. And I think that cities evolved out of, center places of marketplaces along rivers, along crossroads, and they just naturally evolved. What we're looking at here in San Jose is a little bit different than that. It's not necessarily an organic model. We have a lot more control over it. And so we will be, as already happening displacement, I just hope that whatever we do on a very high level would be an occasion of renovation and finding places for everybody, so that we're not just building a building, we're not just building a station, but we're also building truly a city, and that there's a benefit that all residents will have, and not just a more efficient rail system.
Yeah, thank you. So, I mean, I think some of those concerns we've heard a lot about in this group, and they are very serious concerns. The focus of this plan really is on the efficiency of the station and the connections to the surrounding community. And on a certain level, that's going to determine how much access to opportunity everybody in the community has, right? But thank you for the comment, and we'll note it.
Thank you. We'll go to Kathy and then to Teresa.
Thank you. Kathy Sutherland from Delmas Park. I'd like to get a little bit more information about what you're going to be considering for the 3 different scenarios that you're going to propose. And the reason for that is because if there are different routes into Diridon, then I'm assuming that would be scenario 1, scenario 2. And then what is a scenario? Is it just the structure of what the station looks like, or wasn't sure?
Well, what the term scenario basically refers to is the spatial puzzle, you could say. There's all sorts of parts and elements to the station. There's a bus station. There's platforms. There's automobile access. There's bicycles. There's the alignment into the station. There's the light rail. All these things essentially. And what we're trying to do is to come up with different possibilities to solve that puzzle in a spatial way. So these scenarios you could call spatial scenarios. So they're like schematic, very schematic designs that tell you what goes where, basically. Not yet architecture. It doesn't say anything about the materials, the colors, the exact shape, and it does definitely address alignment, but also all of those other elements. Does that answer the question? Okay.
Thank you. We'll go to Teresa and then to Jeffrey.
Nice to hear your presentation. Good to see you gentlemen here. One of the things that you did not mention, Daniel, is that Spur organized and sponsored the trip to the Netherlands and to France for the delegation for the purpose of raising our expectations, for the purpose of conveying the importance of a rail station to a city, to encourage the partners to work together, to come back and really shift the way we are approaching the project from the start versus at the end. And as a follow-up to the study tour, we hosted, Spur last Friday hosted a conference called Transit-Centered Cities, where we invited speakers from France and the Netherlands and the UK and LA and Denver and San Francisco, again, to continue to stretch our imagination, to push for a big, bold agenda, and to recognize the opportunity that the station provides to really serve as a catalyst for opportunity and growth for everyone in our community. I think that was a really important point, John, to reinforce and to remind us all, is that we all need better mobility options. We all need a lot of services and jobs and other things. And so we have to keep that in mind as we move forward. The other thing to think about is the flexibility of purpose for a rail station now. We don't know what technologies are coming tomorrow. So how do we create a flexible space that serves multiple purposes? Obviously, mobility services, but also amenities, public space. And again, we have to create a central place that is really going to become the heart of our city in many ways, but that is always going to be flexible and enable us to use it in different ways. And I think that's a huge opportunity and huge challenge, and it really has to change the way we think about space, because we typically think of a single purpose space. And this is going to be so much more, and it's going to have to be many things to many, many people in the city. So I think it's very fascinating. I would say also one of the core lessons that we learned on the study trip and was reinforced last Friday is the importance of collaboration amongst the partners, because you will get so much more through collaboration, and the end product will be so much greater than the sum of its parts. And so I think this outreach strategy is very complicated. I'm on the community working group of, BART to Silicon Valley. I'm on the high-speed rail, whatever it's called, community working group probably. And on this, that's a lot of separate meetings. If we could figure out, as the process progresses, figure out how to simplify and really create a single, a really dedicated team. It may not, all these people that are here may choose not to serve on those committees as well. I don't know that we were really given that option to not serve on a DISC committee. So I think that is also something to consider. And finally, first and foremost, we have to always keep the users in mind. This is not just an engineering feat. This is not just a land use planning feat. This is about people. It's about moving people and giving them great places to be. And we need to give people the reason to choose transit. We need to compete with the car. We're going to need to compete with a lot of other technologies. And so I think as agency people, and I've worked in infrastructure organizations for a lot of years, power and water, it's very, I think, tempting to think this is an engineering problem that we have to solve. This is so much more than just an engineering problem to solve. And so we need to keep the users at the forefront of our minds.
Thank you very much, Teresa. And before we move on, I just want to remember the public, if you have any comments as well, if you want to fill out a comment card and let us know, we're going to transition to that segment after this. So next up is Jeffrey, followed by Sarah.
Yes. Two questions on, Jeffrey Buchanan with Working Partnerships, 2 questions on scope. You mentioned that the primary focus of the group will be looking at the spatial layout of the station area. Have the partners considered, one of the things that I think as many of us here talk about displacement, talk about housing, it's pretty readily apparent when you look at the public land holdings surrounding the station. Some of the selections around these spatial design questions will then determine what lands are then available for joint development opportunities, or perhaps addressing some of these priorities that you've heard raised here around affordable housing. So have there been any discussions within the partnership about perhaps taking that within the meeting, within the goals for the project? And then secondly, within some of these questions about what this station looks like, I think, well, I understand we want to be aspirational and think big, but certainly, public finance is a constraint on what happens, and, looking at opportunities for raising the necessary funds, there's a lot of important public policy questions there. And I think, to Teresa's point, her convening the other day, they raised a lot of interesting ideas, including from Senator Bell and others around some of the opportunities. Will this project be the space where the partner agencies begin to talk about frameworks for financing some of the ideas that come through this phase of the project, or do we foresee that happening later in the project development?
So I'll take a stab at that. So on your first question, you're absolutely right that, and this is something I touched on in my presentation, the configuration of the infrastructure will determine the quality. It will determine the development opportunities. It will determine the quality of the urban spaces. and determine, you know, what parcels are developable and what are not. It's too early, though, at this stage. We're considering a very wide range of options, and we don't know what those development opportunities are. So it's probably something best to revisit a little bit later. In terms of public finance and financing tools, I can say that is very much part of the organizational scope of the project. And I'll also say, in parallel, you mentioned Senator Bell, there's a lot of discussion at the state level about, you know, what we can do more broadly statewide to really leverage the significant public investments we're making in transportation for these station areas. You know, there's only going to be so many, with respect to high-speed rail, there are only several high-speed rail stations in the state, so it's very important to make the most of those. But some of those conversations are really at the state level, and we're coordinating, but it's still, we don't have very specific news for you. I mean, there are some bills, David Chu, for example, you might be familiar with that, but we'll see how the...
I got something other to add. I just presented here the scope, which is indeed more of from an urban perspective. What we also will be talking to the partner agencies over these coming months in parallel is indeed some of the governance and the financing funding strategies, meaning we intend to design something which actually can be built, and we have an idea on how we going to go forward with how the governance is. It's definitely a topic which is addressed during these coming months.
Great, thank you. We're going to go to Sarah and then over to Kevin.
Hi, Sarah McDermott, representing South Bay Labor Council. I'm curious in what ways you've taken socioeconomics of different types of ride uses into account, and if that's something that you think about. You know, we can make a station that is very easily usable for someone to come down from San Francisco, bike to their office in San Jose, and do the same thing back. But I think we want to make sure that it's also very accessible and usable for people who are commuting from the east side to the downtown area or to the Diridon area to work. So in addition to the question, I think it would be helpful for us to have an understanding of the different types of ridership and what socioeconomic groups are using it. I know just from the anecdotal perspective of the union I work for, which represents hospitality workers, they rely heavily on VTA. I don't know a lot of them that are biking to work. So I just think having that as something that we're considering will also be helpful as we're thinking about displacement issues and not putting further burdens on those communities.
Yeah, maybe I'll respond and then maybe let Daniel speak from the experience of the Netherlands about the role of train stations. But, you know, I've done a fair bit of research on train stations, mostly in Europe, and I published a report that drew lessons for California. And one of the real key lessons I learned about these station projects is that they need to facilitate mobility across scales. So whether it's for the pedestrian trying to get from Cahill Park to Delmas Park, whether it's the bus rider trying to get from somewhere in Santa Clara to a job in downtown San Jose, or for the person who's riding high-speed rail in 15 years from Los Angeles to get to Diridon Station. Diridon Station will be one of the most accessible places in the entire state, but it cannot be just for the people from LA, you know, to your point. So that's the unique opportunity of a train station, and it's definitely something that is front and center of our minds. In fact, this week we're going to be talking about station access and talking about notions of a access hierarchy. It might sound a little jargony, but I'll leave it at that and maybe let Daniel or Martin talk about how you think about these issues in the Netherlands and Europe.
Well, it is our experience that transit projects are usually most successful when they're making public transportation truly public. So that means accessible to a very broad range of travelers. So what we're currently doing is looking into the figures and the characteristics of those travelers today, but also a few decades even from today. And as we do that, what we're planning for is not just the station building and the direct station surroundings, but we also have to design, of course, journeys from door to door, from home to work or vice versa. So I understand your point, and this is something that we have in the back of our minds and that we are definitely working on.
Great, thank you. We're going to go to Kevin and then over here to Glenn.
Okay. Kevin Chrisman, Gardner Neighborhood Association. I heard in the presentation here something to the effect of you're going to build from the tracks out. So that makes it sound like you're going to have some kind of an idea of where these tracks are going to be. Now, unless you know something that we don't know, on the community working group for high-speed rail, we still have 3 alternatives on the table. So you have the at-grade, you have an aerial, and you still have possibly an underground scenario. So there's 3 scenarios already. Now you're talking here in your schedule about having 3 scenarios and finally picking a preferred option at some point here in the future. And it seems to me, until you know exactly where the tracks are, you're not making 3 possible choices. You might have as many as 9, it seems to me, because if you're going to have, because if you only have one option per alignment, to me, we're cheating the process. I think you should have 3 options per alignment, unless you have already selected an alignment. And if you've selected an alignment, I'd like to know about that. So how do we do this where we get a world-class design, yet we're not, watering down the process? Because it seems like you could do a lot of wheel spinning here for a long time with these different alignments before you can get your 3 proposals and then narrow it down to 1. Do you kind of understand what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I'll say a couple words, then maybe Martin or Daniel. So really the focus of this effort is the station, looking outward. And when we're talking about the scenarios, we're really talking about different options for the station. And what I'll say to your question is the options that we are looking at and considering could work with different track approaches from surrounding areas. So that's how I would answer your question. Do you want to add any detail, or is that good?
No, that is totally correct.
That's what they would say too. So does that answer your question?
Well, not entirely, but I see it's so high level, it seems so vague that I'm not quite sure what we're going to have when you're through with your proposals, that's all.
Let me try then, because what I heard from you was, I think you did a matrix in your head, 3 scenarios and then 3 configurations, more or less. But that assumes, I think, a kind of a linear structure on how that would work. I think what we're trying to achieve we want to have options on the table so we can see what works best for all 4 partner agencies. That is not a linear approach so it must be at grade, it must be elevated, or it must be at a tunnel. And then let me look at those 3 scenarios per track configuration. So what I'm trying to say is it could be 3 different kind of options altogether.
Okay, but you mentioned you're building from the tracks out in your presentation. So that means, to me, it seems like you have some kind of an idea of where the tracks are going to be, right? I mean, I don't know how you're getting around this. I mean, either that statement carries weight or it doesn't. And so that's kind of what I'm trying to get at is, if you're truly saying, that, it's 4 people, but you're building from the tracks out, which I understand is good design, but if you don't know where the tracks are, I don't know how you're doing your design process, that's all.
I would say from the design point of view that working from the tracks out doesn't necessarily mean in the order of things that the tracks come first and then the rest follows. What that mainly means is that the alignment in the track infrastructure is such complicated and impactful that this is something that you want to get right for the next 100 years. So there are some elements that are somewhat more flexible in the station, but the tracks aren't. So in the thinking, they always need to be on top of the priorities.
Let me just add to that. So I think another key thing is there are strict requirements regarding turn radii, for example, depending on the speeds that you need to run. So from that standpoint, there are only so many ways the tracks can come through this neighborhood. So I think that's a key element. And to the other point that Daniel was making, the French talk about the laying of big things like the tracks as structuring elements, meaning that's something that you need to decide before you can, sort of to Jeffrey's question, that'll determine the parcelization, what development areas there are. Something like light rail, that's a little more malleable, or where taxis will stop at the curb. Those aren't structuring elements in the same way that the tracks are.
Great, thank you. We'll move on to Glenn and then back to Harvey.
Thank you. Glenn Williams with the County of Santa Clara. I apologize if I missed it as it went around in discussion, but the question was asked earlier about the size of the Diridon station relative to Amsterdam or to Rotterdam or to the other European models that you're using. Can you be a little more definitive about what you anticipate the size in acreage of the station itself and your primary focus is going to be? I understand that the implications of your study will radiate out much, much further than just the station itself, but you've indicated that the station is your primary focus. Is this all on land that is currently owned by one of the 4 participants in the study? Is this is your stationary potentially larger than that, and you're going to be requiring additional private landowners to contribute? What's the massing? Is this, is this 2 acres, 10 acres, 25 plus acres? How do you calculate that?
I think it's, I'm afraid it's still too early to say. We are just getting started, and one of the things that we need to do is exactly find out what the answer to this question is. And that begins with the number of passengers, and what we know from the examples that of the images that I've been showing you, those stations are currently more or less the same size as Diridon will be in the future. So they are probably somewhat larger than the Diridon station will be. But what that means in acres or feet, we can't tell you right now. We need to do some more engineering and calculation before.
Just, if you would, please expand just one little tiny bit on that, which is the other part of the question that was asked earlier is you're very familiar with the other stations. Can you give us an illustration of what the acreage is for 2 or 3 of the models that we could be compared against?
Well, so I can comment very briefly on that. On the report that I published that I mentioned, I compared Diridon station to Lyon-Pardieu, the main station in the French city of Lyon. And that station is about a 15-acre, the rail yard. Diridon is something like 11. That station accommodates something like 550 trains a day, whereas ours only accommodates something like 115. So there's a lot of, through the work that we're doing together, a lot of efficiency that can be had through good design. Another example is LA Union Station. That's about 15 acres. So maybe that's helpful.
Thank you very much. That's precisely what I was trying to do. I'm not trying to hold your feet to the fire for a number. I just wanted to have an order of magnitude.
Great, thanks. We're going to go to Jean and then over to Harvey.
Jean Cohen with the Building Trades Council. I just have two brief points. One, I was just thinking that another knowledge source that will help make this an exceptional project are the employees that work at the transit agencies and the labor organizations that represent them. I think that would also just be a different perspective to understand the operations and the creative ideas from folks that are actually operating these systems. And then I think in August, Lori had a slide with all the development projects in the downtown core, and that was very illuminating and helpful. And I was wondering at a certain point, maybe we could see an overlay connected to this of what are those proposed housing construction projects in the pipeline. Thank you.
Yeah, we'll work on that. Thank you.
Okay, Harvey.
Harvey Darnell, North Willow Glen Neighborhood Association. But I'm asking questions now from my wearing the hat of the General Plan Update Task Force 4 years and the revision for a year. So I've always had a vision of this area as a vibrant catalyst for the community. And I've heard you talk about transportation. I did hear a indoor plaza as a meeting place, but I didn't hear anything about what possible retail, entertainment, restaurants, et cetera, could be envisioned inside the station or in the footprint of the station. And is that part of your plan? First, that's one question.
That is most definitely part of the plan, and one of the things that we have done before in many different stations, and we also think will be a great addition to the Diridon station, is to have facilities for both people traveling as well as for local residents, and that could be a range of things from things that you need on a journey, like a cup of coffee or a newspaper, or places where you spend a little longer. And what we need to do as we think about those is find the right balance between facilities within the multimodal hub versus what's around it and what's in downtown. We'd like things to be complementary rather than creating competition. But there's definitely need for facilities for passengers and citizens in the station area.
Well, as you might be aware or may not be aware, downtown has a dearth of retail. Unfortunately, in the redevelopment of downtown, the retail fled. There's a lot of entertainment, there's a lot of restaurants, but dearth of retail and food sources that are not prepared. Second question is, the group has talked about the rail tracks and the rail corridor as a barrier, and the need to open up that barrier and create an east-west throughput, particularly at the ground level, the pedestrian level, the non-motorized level, bikes, scooters, segways, or whatever else, flying jetpacks or whatever is coming. And are you looking at that as well?
Most certainly. This is one of the main ambitions of this project. It is to connect different modes of transit, to connect people to transit, but also to connect or reconnect, you could say, different parts of San Jose that are currently cut apart by a swath of infrastructure. So this is one of the driving elements, I think, as we come up with these scenarios. And that is north, south, east, as you're saying, but also, of course, north, south for the areas adjacent to the station area.
Okay. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Nadia?
This is kind of backpacking off Glenn and Jean's comments, but I want to know more about the relationship between the vision for the station and the Google project, because it seems like we're visioning a lot here that could potentially conflict with the Google project, especially since, you know, we don't really know what land we're talking about, and we're selling public land that's like right in front of the station to Google. So my question is related to that. Oh, Nadia Aziz with the Law Foundation of Silicon Valley.
So I can say, so in our presentations, I think it's clear, or hopefully it was clear, that we understand that we need to think about the transit project and the development project together. We often talk about this project as an urban project, which means that we need to think very quickly about the impacts of the transportation infrastructure decisions on the development and vice versa. That said, you know, the public agencies who have hired this team, we also need to make sure that the facility serves the public purpose of being a regional transportation hub. And so a key principle is that we need to design something that works on its own as a standalone facility.
Great, thank you. Any other questions about, oh, Norma.
I'm Norma Camacho with Santa Clara Valley Water District. And it's kind of a delicate topic. I know that at the Water District we've dealt a lot with homelessness in the creeks. And I look at these photographs and large public spaces, and they, you know, a lot of times when we have large open public spaces like that, it is an attractant or an area in which the homeless gather because they don't have any other place to go. And so I'm wondering, how are you incorporating that into the design? I know a lot of times transit, like crosstown transit, is actually being used by some of the homeless population as an overnight stay, a safe place to actually sleep as the bus goes cross town. And so I'm wondering how you're going to be looking at that, or at least I want that to be in your thought processes as well.
Yeah, that's a great point, one that we have discussed quite a bit. And you're correct in pointing out that, you know, many of these European stations have large plazas, sometimes not very intensely programmed, as we would say. Sort of, you know, some American audiences might even say sort of wide open expanses. So as part of this process, you know, we're going to, you know, use those examples, but also think about domestic examples of stations that worked well. Not just stations, also examples. I think personally one of the most important examples to look at is the San Francisco ferry terminal and how those public spaces around there work. But also think of Yerba Buena Gardens in San Francisco, or think about, you know, the areas around LA Union Station. I think it's really important, and our team recognizes the importance of thinking about how spaces are used, public spaces in this context.
Great, thank you. Kathy?
Kathy Sutherland again, Delmas Park. One of the other things that I heard recently and that I'm hoping you would consider in your scenarios is the impact of Uber and Lyft and how that impacts the existing streets that are there and whether or not they will create gridlock if there are places for people to drop off and pick up with Uber and Lyft.
Absolutely. That's a very good point. And even more so, I would say that what we're trying to do is prepare for even further development and changes in this, in the field of transportation and public automobiles. And we can expect more development from firms like Uber and Lyft. With the arrival of automated vehicles, all that could change even more. So being flexible and looking ahead to possible developments in the future is something that we're definitely doing.
Great, thank you. Edward.
Edward Zomchef, the Hanchett Park Neighborhood Association. 2 quick points. One, to reiterate one that's been said previously, that anyone who's used transit in the Bay Area can relate to the lack of a seamless connectivity between things, whether it's trying to get to SFO and having to go to Millbrae and around, or the lack of connectivity between VTA and Caltrain, emphasize the seamlessness of that. And the other is one thing that Diridon has that I don't know how many of these other stations had. The current station is on the California Register of Historic Places, so we have a historic building that has a lot of history, a lot of past to it, that I think ideally a solution will address the functional issues without necessarily calling for the removal or kind of the eradication of some of the history that's already there as well.
We are absolutely fully aware of that. With regards to the transit, there's spatial aspects as well as scheduling aspects, and a variety of things you have to do right for the system to work. We are fully aware of that. With regards to the historic station, that is something that we are also fully aware of and that we're looking into currently. It's too early to say how that will relate to the future concourse, future station building, future facilities, but it's definitely something which is being discussed intensively. Yeah.
All right, thank you very much. Any other questions, comments about the presentation? Okay, thank you very much for your time. Thank you all for the great questions. We're going to now transition to public comment. I've only received one comment card. If still time, if you want to fill one out in the back of the room and bring it up. But the one comment we have is from Blair Beekman.
Hi. There is a lot more that is hopeful in what can be sustainable ideas of a local community future, based on the ideas of peace and well-reasoned, more open local community democratic practices that was not possible 5 years ago. We are leaving an era of war. It is with many new ideas, with many new ideas and good communication, the city of San Jose can quietly help lead and be part of a future most can understand as simply the better parts of our human thinking for this country at this time. With this said, I hope the final SAAG committee report here to the City Council can create a very clear list of ideas. This will not only be able to help prepare everyone for what may be the future development questions of the Google Village in downtown, but it can make for a very educational document of what can be good progressive ideas of a community process. This will create a trust, a happiness, and a good educational working standard within community life that I think San Jose government is very much looking for at this time and for the future as well. After respecting protocols and procedures of the city government of San Jose, I think a well-written, clear document from this stage 1 process on the future of Google Village can be a simple, good guide for how City of San Jose government can address certain downtown issues and other city government issues themselves, and possibly make for simple, good examples for other cities to follow if they want to as well. This includes cities like Mountain View. San Jose city government has made some nice adaptations that will include most notes for this entire SAAG process. Thank you for this. I will conclude with the ideas that Google is practicing a few certain practices with this that are regionally based that I think we need to question. We are possibly beyond thinking in those terms at this point as we're developing incredibly new ideas right now that Google should very much respect. Thank you.
Thank you, Blair. If there aren't any other comments, we are actually nearing the end of our meeting here. I just wanted to remind you all that Lori did send you, just to transition real quick back about the report as Blair just brought up, Lori did send you all some comment letters that we have received. We've also extended the comment period. It was actually due yesterday. We've extended to Monday to give you all some more time. If you can, get us your comments on the report as we move quickly toward wrapping it up by the end of this month. We also sent you the results of the Survey Monkey that we did and the 150 so comments that were attached to that, and that's also on the project website for you all to be able to access and review. And we also sent the draft potential solutions as well that is going to feed into the draft report. So unless there's any other questions related to that, looks we might get out of here a half hour early today. Any questions? No? Okay.
Not a word, Harvey.
Meeting is adjourned. Thank you all.